Pleased to welcome you to the two final plenary panels. In this first session, we've got a really interesting panel that's going to discuss going beyond rights to reduce inequalities. I'm going to give the floor to the moderator, Ron Hartman, who's the country director of IFAD sub-regional office based in Jakarta.
Okay. Testing. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We obviously have a very difficult task this afternoon. You've had a very dense couple of days, and we're the last session before, of course, most of you fly home or go somewhere much better. We also realise that the presentations over the last couple of days have been very dense as well. So we're very pleased that this will probably be the most interactive and probably the most exciting session that you've sat through over the last couple of days. I think our panellists agree with us there.
She says so.
Very good. So we're all in the line. The other good thing about the panel here is we've heard a lot of theory over the last couple of days. We've heard a lot of concepts, and now we've got some people that are actually in the field doing the work that are going to share their experiences. So the panel is called Going Beyond Rights. It's the first executive director. So welcome, Katia. Rishikanta Sharma Aribam is the campaign coordinator of the Mahatma Gandhi Seva Ashram, which works to promote rights of the homeless and landless in northeast India, with a special focus on peace and non-violence. Specifically, the organisation works to provide livelihood opportunities for excluded communities, particularly caste, tribe and minorities, single women, physically challenged persons, and they work through democratic accountability, responsiveness and transparency in governance systems. So we have a very broad panel here today. Probably you also notice that all of the BRICS are represented here. So we've got a few middle-income countries, so that should bring in a different angle and perspective. So what we'd like to bring out is we have civil society, a development/non-government organisation, and of course the private sector here with us as well. So we'll be looking at trying to bring out some of those elements in our discussion. So if I can start first with Rishi. Would you be able to give an introduction to your organisation and the work that you do?
I'm associated with Ekta Parishad. Ekta Parishad is a people's movement believing in based on the principle of non-violence. So we are using non-violent social action with the objective that the marginalized people in India would assess the land and livelihood rights, that is land, water and forest. So Ekta Parishad is a platform of community-based organizations, more than 2,000 community-based organizations and individuals are the partner of our Ekta Parishad. And now I'm going to present the social transformation process of Ekta Parishad with a specific area that's in Manipur, in the northeastern part of Manipur, and a specific issue of homestead land. That's the presentation.
One question, why does your organisation have the focus on non-violence? What's the origin of that?
Non-violence is the only alternative to violence. Nothing else. Second thing is that when we talk about the land issue, it is directly linked with the power, money and violence.
And what about the situation in northeast India?
As you know that northeast India for the last 30 years is declared as a disturbed area. Prevail Armed Forces Special Power Act that is giving more power to the army and paramilitary to encounter the insurgency. More than 30 armed groups operating there, and 12 groups are very active. Then ethnic crisis. Manipur has two divisions. One is in plain area, which has 10% of land, residing 60% of population, and the 90% is in hill area, and 40% reside in the hill area. Whatever the ethnic communities or ethnic crisis is going on is happening because of the land, because of the territory, because of the boundary. Some ethnic communities demand autonomous area. some community demand statehood, and some armed group demand independent country from the India. So this is the political situations where we or Ekta Parishad is working through non-balance, taking the issue of very sensitive for land issue.
How do you reconcile all of those elements in the work that you do? So what are some of the approaches that your organisation has to deal with all the vested interests and incentives around these different stakeholders and challenges there?
We got a lot of challenges starting from, so we already identified that Ekta Parishad is specialized in the land issue. Even though we know that there is a problem in the northeastern part of Manipur, northeastern part of the region and Manipur especially, that 10% of the land residing 60% of population. That's simple understanding that, okay, there is a lot of pressures on the land, and because of the growing population, unrest is also there, and so many crises is going on, and it will be. But because of the different ethnic interests, because of the community, so it's very difficult where we have to start with, and which ethnic, because among the ethnics there is suspicion. Even Rishi, the Ekta Parishad, is suspected by the government that, okay, which insurgency group is supporting, financially or physically. And even insurgency group, different insurgency groups also suspected that Rishi is the agent of the government or which insurgency he is supporting. Then, if you are coming to the village, and even within the ethnic groups also, the rich people, they don't want to address what you call the issue for the landless. So it is very difficult for us to go down to the marginalized peoples because they are divided in different things like political, social, religion, ethnical. So these are the problems. So what we did is that we did a small survey. Though I'll show you. Yeah. So taking this opportunity, the Ekta Parishad selected 6 villages, 25 village councils in the 3 districts of the planned area. And we found that, okay, so many people who enclosed the land, the government land, for the last 20, 30 years, but because of the government restrictions to give the land allotment, so they become enclosure. So we took this one, and then we realized that, okay, this type of the problem exists in other communities also, like in the tribal community, in the Muslim also, and in the Meitei also. So by addressing this issue in a specific area, so we would like to address the larger issue in the state. So in that way, how we are started, the starting point, and then going to address the state level. This is the process we did.
Okay, very good. And we'll come back to find out a little bit more about the work that you do and some of the challenges that you face. Katia, if I could turn to you, I'm sure most of the people here are aware of Oxfam and the work that you do globally. Perhaps you could give us a little bit of a snapshot of what Oxfam's focusing on in Brazil.
Yeah. Well, first to say thank you for the invitation to be here. Oxfam has been working in Brazil for many years, but only 2015 we started to be a national organization, so we are an affiliate now. And we decide with our board that our priority will be tackle inequality in Brazil. Unfortunately, I don't know, I think that most of people that came here talk, we are one of the most unequal countries in the world. So we are many unequal countries in the world, and Brazil is for sure one of them. And for us, we are working in the urban area, a lot with youth, with gender and race in the big cities of Brazil. But also we are looking the land issue and some assets in terms of inequality in the country, and the importance to change this situation to have a more just society in Brazil.
Okay. And what, how is the issue of land rights being handled in Brazil? And what kind of contribution is Oxfam making to that dialogue?
Yeah, in the end of 2016, we launched a report about the land inequality in Brazil, showing some numbers. Of course, I was in the session before talking about data. The most recent data we have about agriculture census in Brazil is from 2006. It's supposed to be even 10 years, but we didn't have more after that. So looking at this, we are a country when, if you look all the rural area in Brazil, 1% of the properties are responsible for almost 50% of the rural area in Brazil. It's a very huge concentration. And when you go and look in that, it's not just the concentration of the land, it's a kind of chain. Not market chain, but the chain that concentration of the land, so concentration of education in the urban areas, not in the rural areas, concentration of investments for the big properties or big producers, not for the small. So to tackle this, it's very important to Brazil. Despite the fact that now we are almost 8% of the people in Brazil are in urban areas, what we call family agriculture, the smallhold farmers, are responsible for more than half of the food that the 200 million Brazilians put in their table every day. So there is a role for the smallhold farmers in the country, very important one. And of course, as Brazil has also a big agribusiness, that has its role in our GDP, etc., but also has a role in the concentration of the land, in the model of monoculture, in the pressure on natural resources, and the concentration of the money, and most of all, the concentration of power. We have a Congress, we have election this year, but the current Congress, it's 85% composed by white men, most of them rich, in a country that half of population is women and black. So, it's just to say how there is so many issues linked. And the rural, it's very important because the rural space is still defining the policy and the public interests in Brazil.
Very good. And I'd like to come back on the political economy there and how you're dealing with it. But Faye, the private sector, don't care about rights, it's profit, no? Isn't that what happens? Could you share some of the experience that you have in how Mars is trying to transition to achieve sustainable development outcomes like development institutions?
Okay, thank you for that. So I work for Mars and I've been with the company for 20 years now. And the reason I've been there a long time is because I think at the end of the day, to make anything sustainable, business has to be a part of it. It sustains because, there's something that continues. So whilst the world could paint the image that, private sector is only after profits, I would like to coin, in 1947, Forrest Mars Sr., who, when he started Mars Incorporated, he actually started in one of the first documents we ever found, and we found it in the 1947 document that shows that the purpose of Mars' existence is to derive and to create and increase what we call mutuality of benefits between all stakeholders in the chain, and that if any one of those chain is broken, then the whole chain does not exist. Hence, the view that we need everyone in our supply chains to be thriving and to be resilient has come about actually as a company DNA. So Mars is privately owned, and we still are. And that allows us to have a much longer term vision and much more of a principles-based business that on the basis of mutuality. We've also recently given strong commitments of $1 billion investments over the next few years around 3 particular areas, of which 2 I will talk about, which more pertains to the agriculture and smallholders that we work with. The first one, as part of our Sustainable in a Generation plan, where we say, we have to work within the boundaries of science to ensure that we get a healthy planet, right? And we're looking at 3 areas there. One around climate action, the other one around land, and then, of course, water usage. And the second one, which is critically important, and to what we are talking about in today's conference, is that about thriving people, that we have to increase the incomes of 1 million people that's within our supply chains into something that's resilient and sustainable for them. Human rights, so human rights exploitation cannot happen in our supply chains, and the reality though is a lot of the issues are poverty and systemic, like war and all that, so it's not like any one person can deal with that issue alone, and so how do we then work with communities and governments and NGOs to work within that framework? And the third of Southeast Asia, but we impact actually where 40 to 50 million people's cocoa is indirectly part of their main income. So where I'm talking throughout the supply chains. Top four producers are in the bottom half of the GDP per capita. Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, we're talking about people where 15% of Côte d'Ivoire's GDP comes from cocoa alone, and 40%, and it impacts 5% of the household in Côte d'Ivoire. In Indonesia, we've got challenges where we see huge declines as farmers are abandoning cocoa due to the low productivity. However, the solutions are there, and we do know that the true capacity at a smallholder level, and we've proven it time and time again in our programs, that farmers can quadruple, triple and quadruple yields provided they get the right package. The challenge is how do we do it at scale? How do we do it with impact? So that's just a snapshot of some of the issues. It's poverty, there are human rights issues that we believe exists in our supply chain, child labor, for example, in West Africa, so on and so forth. So, and because of all these pressures, farmers are moving into forestry lands, and and now the recent issue of deforestation in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana has also surfaced. So that's sort of the context of which we are all operating in, and Mars realizes that there's no way we can do it alone. And in fact, the more we do this, I was just telling Ron earlier, funnily, after 7 years of doing this, I realized how much more I don't know about the problem, and how much, and that we've really got to approach this with a humble posture of learning, and about, seeking to understand what do we need to learn, and how do we now need to build capability to ensure that the empowerment of these, farming communities will continue. Otherwise, there is no future for anyone, and especially not for Mars, so for anyone.
Yeah. Faye, one thing that's quite interesting about cocoa, as many of us know, is that the whole sustainability of cocoa is at threat, and therefore it creates quite a unique environment where there's almost a forced partnership between different private sector competitors and non-government and government, etc. Mars is a big global player in cocoa, probably the biggest. It keeps changing. And you have a big effect on the global supply chain. So what sort of things does Mars do to try and promote more responsible business?
There's a few things. Well, it goes back to also the fact that our family is very science-based. So everything that we do has to be scientific-based. So a lot of what we spend a lot of time in is actually in the research. I mentioned nobody's done much research in improving cocoa productivity for a long time. So just doing that piece of research and understanding what else can be done, breeding for better and more resilient, higher yielding crops, and making that freely available to farmers and our supply chain partners, and to a lot of extent our competitors as well, because we need the whole thing to rise. It's not just about our supply chains, but because we are a big part of it, we need the whole boat to rise. So science is one. The other area is how do we then transfer science into the hands of farmers in a way that actually builds on their assets and their capabilities. So some of the things that we do in Indonesia, and you may be aware of it, is these assets of the farmers I know, at least in Indonesia, are very entrepreneurial. The women, the youth, everyone. How could we build then a business model around making that replicable through their assets, right? Their potential. So I could, talk a little bit about that. But then also the third one is looking at next generation. So we all in cocoa and farming in general is facing a big issue coming into the future where the youth, is not seeing socioeconomic opportunities in the village, and so they find and seek something else elsewhere. Whereas we've just done a baseline in Indonesia, and results are surprising, that youth actually want to stay. Both equal amounts of women, girls and boys are very much interested to stay, provided opportunities exist for them. They do see that they can contribute to the development of their communities and their villages. We need to change the language and the dialogue we're having around this youth. They're saying that's a problem, but rather saying they are the solution. They are the solution to the issues we're seeing. Now, when you change the language and you see things in a different light, in their true potential of youth, it starts to open up all sorts of opportunities. So we look at these three sort of things, the pillars of science, the pillars of how we transfer technology, through certification, through the COCO Doctor model, and then also working with education and vocational schools and youth.
Rishi,
sorry.
Yeah, please.
Can I do a comment on this?
Absolutely. Just one, though.
Are we taking questions from the panelists for each other?
I don't think that was in the script, actually. Let me just...
It's not. Sorry about that. Now, I think that this issue about the production chain is a very important one, because when you go in our countries, the big companies in general say, we are not responsible. Okay? So, for example, when Oxfam launched the global campaign behind the brands, and we worked at this in Brazil, we found how Nestlé, Unilever, Coke, Pepsi has issues because the sugar they use in their production came from land grab in Brazil, used to came in some case. So to get the big companies to take their responsibility on the production chain is crucial. And the role of organizations like Oxfam, working together with the people that is directly affected by that social movement, it's important because the companies will act as more pressure they have. And the civil society has an important role to play on this. Mars was one of the companies that made some commitments with the Behind the Brands campaign from Oxfam. It's just to add this role of civil society and push the private sector.
Definitely, I'm with you.
Rishi, if I can turn to you. Faye mentioned before about the importance of engaging youth. And I know you're doing some interesting work in northeast India. Can you explain some of the challenges that you face with engaging young people? And particularly, you mentioned before the various stakeholders that you're having to deal with. What about the power relations? What are some of the challenges that you face there in order to promote non-violence advocacy?
Well, it's very difficult to engage the youth because the educated youths go to the city, not staying in the village, but the problems lies in the village. And so, Ekta Parishad, we are working with the marginalized community. So it's their problem. Once they realize that it's their problem, or it's our problem, if we are not address this problem, and that is also started from today, then, Here, the engaging the youth, it's one of our first, what you call the transformative steps of Ekta Parishad. So we are identifying, or the community identify the youths, and then we are taking youths to the leadership. It's not easy, but while we are doing the comprehensive survey, so we identify some youth who are really actively support to us. At the same time, when we make these landless peoples as a collective, and then we give the responsibility to the collective that, okay, you have to identify one or two youths to represent your community. And then we give the leadership. So taking youth to the leadership for what? For political process. For what? To go to work with the villager or to work with their community. And then that's why we met community-based organizations of this marginalized community. In that way, okay, we're engaging the youth and we're sustaining the youth's involvement in the process. And then when we make the community, then there are 4 representatives in the community-based organization. Then youth is very important for one, representative, woman, and then 2 village leaders. So in that way, we are organizing in this process. That's why it's in that way, okay, we are engaging the youth and sustaining the youth involvement in this process of political movement.
Very good. Can I ask a question about the engagement with government? As a non-government organisation that's seeking to pursue advocacy, to change policies, what's the relationship you have with government around rights?
Since we are believing in the non-violence and doing the non-violence social action, so always said that, okay, why we are doing the non-violence, I'm repeating, linking with the previous questions that, okay, the government should learn how to deal non-violently with the people when we talk about the land issue. And then government should appreciate the democratic process of the people who are fighting for their land rights. So always, okay, we try to have a good relations, but these good relations built by the people's power. So when we talk about the community-based organizations, so we have a federations of the community organizations at the district level and the state level, and then with this community-based organization, we approach to the government. So administrations at the same time the political also. When you talk about the politicians, they count the head. That means the number of the voters. When you approach to the government with so many peoples, with the what you call the existing law, where the people's space is there, where the people can rise, then they accept it. So in that way, okay, we are engaging the administration at the same time of the state also. Regarding the political, these community-based organizations go to the village council assembly. That is started from the grassroots advocacy.
We've got pictures, right?
Yeah. In that way, how we are engaging the youth in the whole process and having the good relations with the government and the what you call the administrations. So this is for land entitlement and then homestead land policies which we propose to the state government. So we are engaging the application, submitting to the government, administration. At the same time, we also proposing a larger issue so-called there should be a proper homestead land policy in the Manipur, where there would be a space for building a house, for plantation of vegetables, and for rearing the animals or poultry, and for some space for the next generations. So it's not only for the homestead, but it's related with the livelihood. At least they supplement their livelihood. So this is in that way, okay, we are engaging the states and the political parties. And when we make the alliance, okay, we involve the ex-MLAs and ministers also who are interested in this cause. And we have other retired officials who can guide us how to involve the administration at the center, how to involve the political sector.
Katia, if I can turn to you. In your introduction, you mentioned the importance of policies. Can you give an overview of the situation in Brazil around rights to land and other aspects?
Just focus, because the situation in Brazil at this moment is a big challenge. And of course, the challenge we have been facing since, let's say, the last 2 years and a half is also impacting on the land. To give an example, last year, Brazil has been doing agrarian reform, that it's a distribution of land for landless people. So in 2017, we have 0. The number is 0. So we came in a terrible reduction. Then money for important programs like food acquisition program, that is an example. The small producer do produce the food is used in the schools around where they are produced. It's, you movement the market at local level. You give incentive for the small producer. Big reduction on the budget. So when you go for the big policies, not only specifically rural, but policies also that contribute for the rural area, social policies, we are facing a very challenging moment. And also when you have a change in the constitution that just frees the investment on social policies for 20 years in a country with this level of inequality is just not acceptable. So I would say that at this moment, it's like hopeless. You know, we are in a very challenging moment as society. Our democracy is going down. Our policies are going down. Our economy is not good except for the big banks. They have a huge profit last year. I don't know how, but they have. And this is a challenge, but this also is an opportunity for us. Because I think it's the moment when the social movements need to be together, when proposals need to be in the table, and when we need to push for the elections that will happen in October, an important issue on the agenda, that it's how the new government will tackle inequalities in Brazil.
Very good. And ladies and gentlemen, please keep your questions coming. I see that there's a few very nice, very tough questions for Faye coming up, which I'm looking forward to. But perhaps I can ask you a tough question.
Yes.
We know Oxfam has been in the news recently for perhaps the wrong reasons, and Faye did mention before about the importance of women's rights and avoidance of exploitation. What's the situation in Brazil in terms of Oxfam, and what are you doing to try to promote women's rights, and what can development institutions do, because it's not an issue that's confined to Oxfam?
Yeah, first I'd like to thank you for this question. I think that after 70 years of Oxfam, an organization with a commitment to overcome poverty, to defend the human's rights, to fight inequality, to do humanitarian, we are facing probably one of the biggest challenge in our organization, and we have truly commitment with human rights. But we have the situation that the things didn't went well. And first I'd like to say, because this is for all of us, you know, we cannot just say, oh, it was that Oxfam. We are in the one way, one Oxfam. So we have the commitment, we have an international commission that was created, and we are pushing this information in Brazil as well, because people have been asking us about what's going on in Oxfam. We have a 10-point commitment in terms of things that we are improving our organization. We are putting all this information publicly for people to follow up with us. We are contracting an external investigator to look specifically the cases in Haiti. And in the case of looking inside of Brazil, it was a very hard moment for us, because we have a strong program on empowering young black women in the urban cities, in the favelas. And they suffer all kinds of abuse and harassment. So it was important to have a discussion with them about this, about what can happen. You know, Oxfam has 10,000 workers in the world. And what I can say is that most of these people is very committed with the value of the organization. And in Brazil, what we are trying to do is keeping our work on gender rights, and also looking at race, that it's another issue. Also, we can have discrimination inside organizations, institutions, so we are very keen to tackle these two issues in our work, but also internally with our team.
Very good. Faye, if I could throw a couple of these questions at you. There's probably two aspects. One is how does Mars in your business model prevent degradation of rights or prevention of negative impacts? And the second is, how do you balance your commercial, you're a company, and profit is a motivation, with the social objectives that you have as well? So perhaps I can put both of those two angles to you.
Okay, so, well, so to the first question, you're asking probably the one that how Mars supports to prevent...
Yeah, yep.
Okay.
But broader than just land grabbing, because there's labour, there's lots of potential risks.
Well, the reality, though, is, like I mentioned, these issues are systemic and stems from poverty or civil war from neighbouring countries, and hence families have migrated into Côte d'Ivoire, and and they've is it switched off? And they've and children are working in conditions where they are exposed to hazardous and all that. I think it goes back to the point that we are, one is definitely about education and awareness, working with communities where we source from, to not just to be aware of that children have to be in school, and when they are in farms, if you see ILO, children in farms is not necessarily a bad thing unless it's responsibility, unless they are exposed to hazardous and dangerous work and they are not in schools. Giving communities an understanding of, first of all, the awareness, and second of all, when we do detect then issues, then how do we mediate? Because every case will be different. Every situation will be different. So how do we then work with these communities to remediate the challenges? So that's definitely education is one piece of that. The other one is also, we talk about partnerships and working with multiple stakeholders in that. So we tend to have partnerships in those approaches. We don't have the solutions to everything, and nor do we profess to have that. And that will be a slow process. It's a process of working together. And we don't see profit and social as something that actually is separate. They are actually one. Socio-economic. How can we cannot have cocoa if, like in Indonesia, farmers are leaving cocoa. There isn't cocoa when farmers have totally given up because the yields are so low and the soil is gone, and they've gone and done something else, and they've gone to become sailors or something else. It's long-term security of what we need as well. So, and we've come to a strong realization that unless you involve the community in your process, in the whole thing, we're not going to have cocoa. So it's not like it's profit above all else. It's about that it's all got to go hand in hand and progress them all in parallel.
Rishi, there's a question here about the balance between sustainable resource management and community livelihoods. Could you give some reflections on that? You mentioned before about the importance of livelihood as both an outcome but also an incentive to improve rights and conditions.
I'm very specific about our district demand. That when we talk about the lands, we can divide into two. One is the homestead land and other the agricultural land. So I'm just focusing on the homestead land. But even in the homestead also there should be a space for livelihood supplement. So then our next step will be demanding for the agricultural land. That's much more relevant in this the community livelihood. And there is some important thing is that in each and every village the common land is there. The common land is there, and the village council is maintaining it. Village council is managing it. So we will support what you call the traditional way of managing the resources, but this is going to be destroyed by the what you call the government's new work in the name of the development. So how does we balance it is that, okay, first and foremost thing is that we will support our traditional way of dealing with the resources. At the same time also, we will resist the government steps to destroy this, what you call the sustainable way of managing the community. And this is one of part of the movement. So I don't know what about the others, but this is the process we are doing in our state.
There's a really interesting question that we see here as well about something that was mentioned yesterday, and the question is that something that we've left the age of rights and entered the age of security, and does this promote violent movements? Any reflections from any of you on that, particularly Rishi with what you're advocating? Does that resonate at all with you?
Well, for my understanding, the right and the security, well, maybe like it's those people who are working at the ground level, okay, what we call it, it's all word politics. I don't know much about the right and security, what they mean. But people need to demand their rights. And even they got the right that the legislation has made, this is your right. But people need to go beyond that. Who will do? The people, those people who are the victim, who are the marginalized. And that's not alone, but it should be a collective force. Otherwise, you don't have the force, then you're going to get it.
Katia, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this was a provocative point yesterday, and I think it's important. In Brazil, we have one of the high numbers of murder of defenders of land or environmental issues, human rights. And Latin America, not just Brazil, Latin America also has the bigger numbers. It's very bad to be on the first places on this kind of numbers. And we are a society that today, when we are here talking, Brazil violence with the youth, it's at 23 minutes. A young black man is murdered in Brazil in the cities. It's 23 minutes. We killed more than 30,000 young black men by year in the country. I don't know how we, because I'm part of this society, can sleep with that. You know, we are killing our citizens. So I think, and how you talk about rights with these people? Rights? People just want to survive the next day. And in the rural areas, the violence is huge. So that is why, and I think this is very connected with inequality. So, you know, the inequality, it's not marital inequality. We're not talking about marital, you study more than them and then you deserve better. No, we are talking about structural inequality, streams, where there is no opportunity. Because if you have a good school, I don't have food, I don't have health, I don't have house. So how I can compete with you? No, there is no way. So I think it's urgent that as society we understand what the extreme inequality and rural inequalities are part of this are doing with our society.
Very good.
I'd like to say something as well. I actually have a quite optimistic view on the state of humanity today.
Thank goodness.
I think that in order for something new to be built, the old order must be broken. And I see what we are seeing is signs of what is breaking down, the mistrust between people and institutions and between communities or whatever, you know, and all that. I actually think that, and we can see already glimmerings of this happening. What I think going forward is coming back to why we're here and we talk about partnerships. How can we build these uncommon collaborations that we are starting to reconceptualize these relationships? The relationship between members of a community, between community and the local government, between government and NGOs, between companies. Everyone has a different role to play. I'm not saying that Mars is a altruistic company. We, of course, are driven by a reason to be as well, which is part of it profit, except we think profit in long term. The whole idea that everyone has a role to play, however, what I've seen is a lot of partnerships is just partnerships in words, but when actually people come together, they're like in a boxing ring. They're not actually really saying, hey, you know what, we've got all the same objectives here and we want to, really all work towards the same thing. And how do we then create that sense of trust and collaboration that we are indeed working together with the community and the institutions and the farming families and private sector and NGOs, that we're really supportive of each other. Look, whatever happened in Oxfam can happen in IFAD or anywhere tomorrow. The world is not perfect. We just need to make sure that we've got management systems in place that we will address these issues as they come up. Similarly, our supply chain is not perfect, but we are committed to say that when we do find something, let's you work with me and we find a solution together and implement it. So how do we reconceptualize future partnerships where it's based on trust and collaboration and working together, rather than actually, we say it's a partnership, but really we're all just getting in and, trying to have a go at each other, right?
Katia and Rishi, can I ask you to reflect on this from your perspectives? How do you move partnerships forward in a way that can contribute to this agenda, where everyone is adding value and making a contribution in different ways?
Good. No, I don't want to give the idea I'm very pessimist. I'm a very optimist. I need to tell you that.
Of course.
The moment is very hard now, but in general, I'm a very optimist. No, I think the partnerships, I don't see a solution for the challenge, the society challenge we face without working together. There is no sector that can solve this alone. So this is, for me, the starting point. So definitely we need to work together, to sit together, to discuss together. And Oxfam has been talking with companies, Mars is one of that, but also talking with an 11 and others about, okay, this was not right, what can improve. I'm sure that now they want to talk with us about our challenge as well. It's fair. So I think that the idea of the partnerships, it's important and we support them. The only thing I believe is that there is one point that goes beyond. We need to have a partnership to push laws, governments, to do the right things in many issues. We need to do a partnerships for companies to pay the taxes they need to pay, not put in the paradise fiscal, what is the name of this? Fiscal heaven, tax heaven thing. Yes, so, there are many things that we need to have the companies together, not pressuring to have benefits, to have privilege. It's not specific, talking broadly, yeah? But there is things that we really need to have more openness from companies to review their practices. And of course, as social movements, as civil society, we need to sit together with governments to find solutions for that.
Very good. Rishi, would you like to reflect on that?
Well, my understanding of partnership is that why I came here, though I'm working at the village level or in a very remote part of the states, because it's a partnership. Exchanging the knowledge, what's going on at the village level and what's going on at the global level. And until and unless it's not directly linked, and think about the future course, then because that's the one thing. Another thing is that partnerships should be not only for what you call the research scholars and all that, because like if you are addressing a issue at the local level, it's not enough that only social movements actors will take. We need the very evidence research data, informations to do the lobby, political lobby, and administrations at the same time all the policy lobbies. So I'm looking from that perspective that the partnership is very important.
Just building on that, one of the things we've learned that if we want to actually see farmers changing behavior over time, and maybe it's an idea for how future partnerships could work, is that we call it accompaniment, or in some business contexts they call it coaching. We were realizing that we were training thousands and thousands of farmers that wasn't any change of behavior. And then we realized, well, this isn't changing anything, what needs to happen? And we started actually doing accompaniment. You visit them on the first week, you say, you know what, this is how we prune the tree. Can I come back next week and see that you've pruned the tree? We come back next week, he's not pruned the tree, and so we prune the tree again with him. And we've realized that the only way to actually change behavior is when we actually work hand in hand, long-term, together. And maybe that's how we reconceptualize relationships in the next time with governments and NGOs and companies and communities, and all that sitting together is to, well, one is have the principle of justice and oneness. We are all in this with one aim. And then this thing about accompaniment, where if you find an issue, how can we work with you? So, maybe something that is a practical, maybe from what the work that we do with farmers is to understand that actually people need accompaniment, institutions need accompaniment, so do communities, so do everyone, private sector included. So it's more of a spirit of accompaniment rather than the spirit of,
Very good. We've had a good prompt from the audience. Is it a talk show or is it interactive?
Yes, I like this
you
one. I really
preempted
like
me going
Okay.
to the audience. But I'd particularly like to invite any questions from the audience. But I'd also, if there's anyone from government or perhaps UN development agencies, it'd be interesting to hear your perspectives as well. So I think we have some roaming microphones. I saw the lady over here, my colleagues here, perhaps to kick off, and we have another question over the far side.
Retired UN. My question was to Mars. When I was in FAO, we had started discussing with Mars about Ivory Coast. So your presentation was very interesting. The issue we had is that in those areas, the people who grow cocoa are not doing only that. They have farming systems where they also have food crops and all this kind of thing. And at that time, they had problems with the volatility of prices because of the civil war, shall we say, in the country. So the issue is Mars now looking at these people and seeing how to help them, keeping that integrated perspective, or are you only looking at the cocoa production side, because this had tendency of biasing the process? Thank you.
Before you respond, I'd like to take a couple more questions because we're very short on time. Yes, and then Julianne.
Yeah, till now we spoke about rights purely, a lot of it was through the perspective of litigation. In some ways, access to land and litigation and organizing and all. But let me just for a moment go beyond that into the realm of legislation. I come from a country where for 10 years there was a government in power which really looked at development legislation through the perspective of rights-based approach. So for 10 years we had laws such as right to food, right to education, right to information, so on and so forth. So just beyond rights itself, it was rights-based legislation. But even beyond that, actually what we ended up seeing was that this rights-based legislation was not, they put it into action because of pressure from civil society, but it did not follow adequate resources or political will, implementation capacity, and other things, which and follow-up, accountability. These were the things which are missing. What it did actually was that it made this hollow rights-based legislation the new base. So whenever someone would bring it up, oh, by the way, we need to improve education, they're like, there's already a legislation. So what do you want us to do? So in some ways, this rights-based approach has been used in some contexts as a way to shed responsibility and say there is a legislation to do this, we have done our job. After this, it's up to you how you want to use it. So this is one thing which I think, and because rights-based approach implicitly tends to be to move towards universalization of many services. So which means that it disproportionately affects, such kind of negligence disproportionately affects the poor. So that's what I just wanted to bring to the fore. Thank you.
And I might invite Katia to reflect on that. Julianne, would you? And then we have a question over the gentleman over here.
Juliane Friedrich, Nutritionist in IFAD. Unfortunately, I have to turn to Mars again. And I'm interested in how Mars is actually handling the issue with child labor. In IFAD, we take youth very, very serious at the moment because we would like to have this, or we have it as a mainstreaming agenda in IFAD. And youth starts from somewhere. And if we have child labor, we also know that these children, for example, are not going to school. So if you are then really looking at the youth and what you can do for the youth, what happens to those ones who are already left behind? And I think we have been talking about inequalities, and we also have been talking in the previous session a lot about innovations. And I think here it would be good to see what could be an innovation to really mitigate it. Because I'm not happy to hear that I have heard it from Mars, and I know also that Mars behind the brand is one of the better ones. I think you got the best points you can get on that, also with child labor. But nevertheless, I think it's unacceptable for me that I'm hearing the moment you are talking about chocolate, cocoa production, you cannot go away with child labor. I think this is unacceptable for me. Okay.
We'll take two more, and then we'll have a chance to respond. Please.
Okay, thank you. And just following up what the panel agreeing just a few moments ago, so I do believe and I see that the private sector is a driver for sustainable rural development. In that sense, I believe that to work from all frontiers will really help in this sense. I have a specific question about for Mars. So which kind of practices are you taking into account to tackle soil degradation and other environment aspects? Maybe you mentioned that you were doing some research on productivity. I'm just would like to know whether or not you are considering agroecology. And agroecology?
Again, okay.
Yeah, and I think this is related with a question that I saw there, that monoculture and productivity. Okay.
Very
Thanks.
good. And I'll invite your question to one of the other panel members, rather than Mars.
Thank you for the invitation, but allow me to address the question to Faye.
Foils.
Four.
Faye, you mentioned that the company gives a lot of attention to science and to partnerships. Now, IFAD had a partnership with ICRAF and with Katia that are involved in cocoa production, taking into account human rights and developing innovations in agroecology and also avoiding child labor. I wondered if you have any partnership with ICRAF or Katia for cocoa production, taking into account all these elements. ICRAF, which is one of the CGR centers based in Nairobi but working in Asia, Latin America and Africa.
Who was the second?
Katia, which is working with ICRAF in Central America and part of South America.
Okay. It's not me, not okay.
Okay, well, a lot of interest in our private sector colleague here. Faye,
I'll have to, go. So monoculture versus, to the first question around, are we only interested in cocoa or everything else? So our sustainable and the generation commitment is farming families have to meet minimum living income, and they're not going to get it only from cocoa. So we recognize that the need for farmers to diversify their income, okay, whether it's on farm or off farm. And so on farm, we're looking at then what are some other complementary crops that, if you get the cash crop being the, you improve the yields on that, and then you then allow, more income from less land, that then allows you more land to do food crops and other crops that then you can either sell or consume, because we also know that stunting and nourishment is a big challenge in some of the communities. So we're looking at it much more from a, not just on-farm but also off-farm diversification perspective now. A number of pilots have started, and but we're very early on in that space. To the second question around child labor, again, we realize this is again a systemic, long-term issue. We do realize it exists in our supply chain, and we have zero tolerance for it. There's no place for forced labor or any kind of labor, child labor, if we want to have a sustainable cocoa future. We do have evidences that it does occur, and clearly, whilst there has been best practices, mostly by the ICI work that has been done, initiated by Nestle. We've taken a lot of that learnings and seeing how we can, replicate that in the communities that we work with. But however, we're not happy with the progress, and we do know that we have to redouble the efforts here. So again, coming back to let's work together on this, and we will be redoubling our efforts in this space, and we all recognize, and I'm with you, that we should have cocoa and chocolate that is free of all of these human rights exploitation. As to innovation around youth, so I'm responsible for Asia, and what we do in Indonesia, for example, is work with vocational schools, where we are just targeting education of youth at the point before they make decisions about their future. Do they want to go to the cities? Do they want to stay back in the farms or in the communities? And there we work with them to bring in like STEM curriculum, where we do know that also the quality of education is lacking in a number of these areas that we work with, but not trying to solve the education issues as well, is to say how can we work with all these vocational schools and bring in a STEM curriculum and allow then these youth, we do start informal youth groups to actually activate them in a way that looks at their surrounding farming communities and how they can create businesses and solutions that gives them an income yet also solves the issues of the community. So we're looking at it in a number of ways, from an informal youth group empowerment to actually dealing with the systemic educational issues as well. I have that, so that was the second question.
Yep, that's fine. And partnership, ECRAF?
There was another one here around agroecology.
Oh, sorry,
I
agroecology,
can't
soil
actually
degradation.
explain that much, but the work we're doing on soil is coming up with lots of very interesting, soil degradation is coming up with lots of interesting insights to us that what has happened, at least in Indonesia, a number of these, it's imbalance from a nutrient perspective, but also very low on organic content. So, so there are multiple challenges, okay, around soil, and we're not, again, going to solve this overnight. So we look at it from a perspective of how do you rehabilitate the soils back to production again. Because you can have the best clones, the best farmers, but if the soil's dead, it's, you know, you're not going to what. So soil is a big, big area of our research as well. And we are coming to a number of interesting insights. Happy to share, but we'll take that offline. As to partnerships, oh my gosh, I'm like, as to partnerships, yes, we do work with ICRAF in Côte d'Ivoire. I'm not sure about the organization that you mentioned in Central America, in Americas and Latin America, but clearly, you know, ICRAF is our implementation partner in Ivory Coast for our Vision for Change program.
Also in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Yes. There was an interesting comment, I think, about legislation and legislation to shed responsibility. And I don't know, Katia or Rishi, if you want to reflect a little bit on that in the context of your work.
Yes, I think the rights-based approach on legislation, it's an important step. The implementation of this, as you said, it's the big issue. So in terms of budget, that it will show the prioritization or not with this policy. I think that this is a place when civil society also can play a role in terms of monitoring. But also I think this is our responsibility as citizens and looking what's going on with the commitments that we have or the rights that we have in the law and how we can make these rights to be a reality. But this doesn't mean the rights to be in the law are not important. It's very important that we have them there because this is the first step. But it's not enough. And in the case of Brazil, we have many examples. We have a very good constitution, very good law in many areas, but at the end, the implementation, it's not what needs to be.
I just want to mention that having a legislative law is a first step, as I agree that. Without it, if you continue the struggle, then you will not have what you call the stick. Once you have the stick, then you can think about the working. So as I mentioned that until and unless if the people who are going to benefit that scheme or that right, then if they are not collectively, they are not organized, they are collectively have the force to negotiate with the government, to pressures to the implementing agency. Otherwise, that's why we at Parishad is always first mobilize the people, do the struggles with very understanding, and comes up as a right or as a scheme, and then they will get the maximum benefit. This is our experience. Otherwise, just getting the rights or changing the legislation, it is not calculated to the village.
Unfortunately, we're out of time. So what I'd like to do is to perhaps give each of the panelists a couple of minutes just to leave us with some summary points or reflections of way forward. Perhaps, Rishi, if I can begin with you.
Well, what I would like to conclude is that believing in the non-violent social actions and practicing it's that we would like to mobilize the people in a non-violent way. Otherwise, the violence is there because everybody, every community who are suffering are potential to violence. So using the non-violence actions is there. At the same time, also government also should learn how to deal with the problems with the non-violence and appreciate the people's or the democratic process. At the same time, also we have to work with the marginalized people who are very far away from us and very difficult to reach there. Until unless these community people are recognized and reach there, organize them, and have their negotiations power, then inequalities will be exist. So working at the village level is very important.
Yeah, I was thinking about the 4 R's, and the 4 R's for me need to be together with a very big 4Ps, because each R has power around that. So I think particularly on the evaluation, to give more visibility for the power that it's on the table, or sometimes hide around the table. I think this is a big challenge, particularly when we are talking about inequality. In the terms of the big inequalities, we are talking about big interests, economic interests, power interests. And also looking the conversations yesterday and today, I think keep the diversity in the approach is very important. There is no one solution, no one model. We have diversity in our societies. We have political contexts that are diverse as well. And the last one is that there are some old-fashioned things that are still so important. Empower people, capacity building, doing mobilization against governments, companies. This is all necessary. We are not in a situation that we overcome this phase. And the European, it's just going back. The situation is not solved in Europe at this moment. Needs a lot of people in the street claiming the rights, claiming more distribution in different sense. So just my final comment, and I really appreciate to be here these 2 days. Thank you.
I just want to come back to how do we change the way we collaborate into the future, make it unprecedented if we something that working together with rather than maybe against, a bit strong. And how do we collaborate on the principles of, again, justice and oneness, and that we all actually have the same objective at the end, and that we're all in this together, and we all know where we need to go, but we're not there yet. So let's help each other get there.
Very good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation. Unfortunately, we probably needed a whole workshop itself on some of the topics that have come out today. But I think there's been some very rich experiences that have been shared, and from our panelists who've travelled long distances to be here. I encourage you at the end of the workshop to follow up with them if there are further questions, and I know we weren't able to get to some of them that were put forward. So I'd like you just to join me in appreciating the panelists.
Thank you.
And thank you also for your endurance.
Thank you.